Test, test.
Don't trip over all the wires.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you very much for coming tonight. On behalf of Women's Voices for the Earth, I'd like to welcome you all here to our second in a series of Dioxin Roundtables. It's our second in the official series, although this is really our third meeting on this issue. At the first meeting, where we met with Stone Container and other folks in the community, we agreed to disagree about the toxicity of dioxin, but we all agreed that it was something that we as a community should work to reduce our exposure to. So from that first meeting, we formed a small committee to decide how to proceed with this. And we came up with a series of dioxin roundtables. We had the first dioxin roundtable last week in this room, which focused on dioxin in pesticides. Tonight, we're really glad to have with us members from the Stone Container Mill, and we'll be discussing dioxin at the mill. The third roundtable, which will be scheduled soon, will focus on dioxin at the White Pine Sash, dioxin in slash burning and other sources of burning, and all other sources of dioxin. So if any of you got any concerns, please be sure to let us know. And as I said tonight, we are here to discuss dioxin at Stone Container Mill, and we're really pleased to have Stone Container here. We're representatives from Stone Container here to discuss these issues, and we're really happy that they agreed to participate in this forum. We are very sorry that representatives from Local 885 are not here. Unfortunately, they decided not to attend this roundtable, but we sincerely extend our invitation to them to attend future discussions, and we want to let them know how sorry we are they are not participating. We feel that their voices are very important in these discussions. So as I said, again, we hope that they will join us for future discussions. I want to just mention to you a couple of words about Women's Voices for the Earth. One of our primary objectives is to address toxins in our environment, and we try to do that in the context of all other social issues. And so because of that, we want to look at this issue tonight in the context that we want to continue to see Stone Container operate as a viable economic entity within our community. We recognize that Stone Container provides a lot of jobs in this community and economic vitality, and we believe that some of the solutions to the issues that we will be that there are solutions to some of the issues that we'll be discussing tonight, and that we can find solutions to keep the corporation happy and the community happy. And I wanted to just say what the context of this is. In Western civilization, I believe that the concepts of rights are basic to democracy. And if life is a right, then we must protect those elements that sustain it. Since drinking water and breathing air are essential to life, clean water and air are rights as well. What good are any rights, free speech, religion, assembly, if we are not healthy enough or alive to enjoy them? So we hope we can find solutions to these problems. And I'm going to pass the microphone on to Commissioner Michael Kennedy, who will then, after he says a few words, will pass it on to Sherry Munther, who will be our facilitator for this evening.
Thank you, Bryony. I'm happy to be here as a representative of government, and I want to speak only just a few minutes to talk about what the role that government might play in a process like this. And before I start, I'd like to really thank everybody for coming, because what just in your appearance here It shows that there is a responsibility that we all share, and there is a problem out there that we all need to resolve together. And it isn't a problem that one of us needs to resolve. It's a problem that all of us need to resolve. And so the role of government, in my view, when Montana became a state back in 1889, it already had a legacy of mining, and we spent the morning out at the Superfund site in Milltown talking about what that problem was and how it got to be where it is, how we acknowledge it, and how we begin to deal with it. And in the midst of that were government employees and government elected officials representing all of us, and also representing how we make laws that improve really our quality of life. So that's really kind of the essence of government. There are things that government can do that we individually cannot do. And some of those things are, of course, directing policy, and policy is very important. Provide leadership. Leadership obviously is important. All you need to do is look back at the Water Pollution Control Act's amendments in 1972, the Muskie bill, and you see that when Senator Muskie from Maine decided that we needed to clean up the nation's rivers, that idea of leadership resulted in some pretty remarkable effect. Information, we can do a lot toward disseminating information that is useful to everyone who has the responsibility to deal with it. We can coordinate, we can do all of those things, and we can also make decisions. And so that is a basic role of government, not only in this, but many other efforts that, again, owe to the quality of life. So what I want to do, again, is to be very thankful for everyone who is here and acknowledge the equal standing of everyone here in addressing a very serious problem, and together we can deal with it in a very effective way. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Sherry Munter, who's going to talk about roles and agenda and ground rules.
Now I know how to work this thing. My name is Sherry Munter, and I'll be your facilitator tonight. My role is to be your process guide through this process. You won't hear any content from me, but I will pipe up every now and then and tell these fine folks that their time is getting to be close and time to shut it off. I have a couple warning notes up here. One of them has a number 1 on it, and one of them has a number 3. The number 3 is a bright yellow color. That means you've got 3 minutes left in your time. And the bright 1 means you've got 1 minute in your time. Then after that, I'll have to get the hook, I guess. Hopefully not. Some ground rules, or I like to think of as the climate that we'll be working under for this roundtable tonight, is posted up here on the wall. Hopefully everybody will speak respectfully, and no name calling. I don't think we need to worry about that, but I put it up there just in case I have to call you on it. We'll focus on the problems and away from the people. The roundtable presents different viewpoints. It's not arguments on whose science is better. The purpose of tonight is to provide a forum for people to learn and listen and make up their own minds, and a forum for industry and the public to try and solve health and environmental issues together. So it's not exactly a debate, and it's a learning process and a listening session. I'd like to encourage you to listen with an open mind. That includes the audience as well as the panel. There will be no interruptions when the panel is making their presentation, and they've all been coached ahead of time on how much time they have, because we have 2 hours for this meeting tonight. We'll end at 9:30. I'd like to have you respect each other's airtime. I'd like to discourage debating, but identify some issues and concerns that you might have, and stay on time. At the end of the presentations from the panel, there will be a chance for the public to let us know any of your comments and concerns. The Missoula Community Access Station is recording this, so we will not be taking notes. However, during the part where you as the public have a chance to comment, we will be trying to capture your thoughts on flip charts at that time, and Jim Parker will help me with that portion of it. I'd like to introduce the panel at this time, and to save time, I'd just like to go around the room and have people around the tables here just introduce yourself and say who you represent, and that's about all we have time for. So if you would just mind doing that. You will not hear from everybody up here on this panel this evening, but there will be a time when they will be probably participating during the public involvement portion of it.
Good evening. I'm Leif Griffin, and I'm environmental engineer at Stone Container.
Hi, I'm Vicki Watson. I'm an environmental studies and biology professor from the University of Montana.
My name is Troy Savage, and I'm a process chemical engineer at Stone Container.
My name is Annie Savetics, and I'm a member of Women's Voices for the Earth.
I'm Arun Samashwar. I'm with the National Council for the Paper Industry of Air and Stream Improvement, and I'm a senior research engineer. Thank you.
I'm Michael Kennedy, County Commissioner, Missoula County.
Garen Smith, Associate Professor of Environmental Chemistry at the University of Montana.
I'm Dick Barrett. I'm a professor of economics at the University of Montana.
I'm Terry McLaughlin. I'm supervisor of wastewater treatment facilities at Stone Containers Mill.
I'm Rudy Singh, president of Emerging Technology Transfer, based in Reno.
I'm Ed Scott. I'm environmental manager for Stone Container.
I'm Brian Ishwan. I'm the director of Women's Voices for the Earth.
I'm Archie Beaton, executive director of the Chlorine-Free Products Association.
I'm Bob Oshie, general manager of Stone Containers Mill in Missoula.
I'm Jim Carlson, director of environmental health, Missoula County.
Thank you for doing that. If you did not pick up a copy of the agenda, there's some agendas out on the table, but I'm going to go over some changes to that agenda at this time. Under item 2, dioxin, what do we know and should we be concerned? Under sub-item 1, instead of Leif Griffin, we will hear from Arun Shumashwar. And then under item A, under number 3, you will not be hearing from sub-item 2, Terry McLaughlin. So the time will be distributed between the other two people. Are there any questions on the agenda? Can you all live with the ground rules or the climate we'll be living under for the next 2 hours? Very well, let's get started.
Even prepared for making any kind of presentation, actually. By the way, the National Council of the Paper Industry is a research organization that primarily does research for the pulp and paper. I'm sorry. The council is a pulp and paper research environmental management arm, and we do research in many, many areas, and of course dioxins over the last several years have been one of them. And my primary expertise is in the combustion area, but I was asked to give you a very brief overview for those of you who are totally unfamiliar with what dioxin is, some very quick and brief, the ABCs of dioxin, and I'll try to do that in a couple of minutes. Basically, as many of you here will know, is it bright enough? Dioxins are a group of compounds, and they're primarily on the left side you have the dioxins. The dioxin is a term that's used for dioxins and furans, the two groups of compounds. Dioxins are primarily two benzene rings, which are 6-change carbon rings, which normally have hydrogen on each of the ends, connected by an oxygen on both top and the bottom. So that's the dioxin. There are essentially 75 possibilities of how each of those hydrogens can be substituted by a maximum of 8 chlorines. So there are possibly 75 potential polychlorinated dibenzodioxins. So in the same fashion, if you break away one of those chains and don't have the oxygen, it becomes a furan. And generally speaking, furans are roughly 1/10 the toxicity, although that's not true for all the isomers. And there's 135 different possibilities for the furans. Now, of these 75 and 135, only 17 have been found to be, have been assigned some toxicity. And so generally, when you hear about dioxins and the toxic equivalent of dioxins in any source, you're talking of the sum of the 17, each of which have been assigned an international toxicity factor. The 2378 dioxin is the most toxic with a factor of 1, and everything else is like 2378 means in the 2378 positions on that dioxin diagram there, if you've got chlorines instead of hydrogen, that becomes the 2378. So everything is compared relative to the 2378 variety. Okay. I won't get into the health effects and all that stuff. It's beyond my expertise, but suffice it to say the whole issue of dioxins in terms of carcinogenicity, toxicity, even among the most well-intended people, is highly debated on both sides. It's not clearly, there is no clear consensus at all levels as to whether or not it's a human carcinogen and so on. So it's a hot potato, and I won't get into that. Generally, my intent is to introduce what dioxins are and to tell you what the major sources that have been identified by EPA are, and generally what in the pulp and paper industry are our sources that we know of, and how they compare with the overall compilation of dioxins by the EPA. The latest compilation, which I actually got a couple of days ago from a document that will come out in November, called the Locating and Estimating Document for Dioxins that EPA puts out on many, many chemicals. The sources of dioxins have generally been identified as byproducts. They are not intentionally produced. They are unintentionally produced as byproducts, obviously, from all the mostly chemical processes. And the chemical processes that have been identified in most EPA documents as the major sources of them, the man-made sources, are the top ones: the municipal waste combustion, combustion of solid and liquid fuels, and that covers quite a bit of ground, medical waste incineration, secondary copper smelters, Portland cement manufacture. And I'm listing them in the order of the hierarchies in the decreasing order in which the numbers come out in the latest compilation of EPA, and forest fires, and there's about 20 different other ones that are listed in that. Okay. Well, since this is about the pulp and paper industry, okay, the pulp and paper industry, the source of dioxins are twofold. One is the dioxin that many of you would know, that is known to be generated when you bleach pulp with chlorine. Okay. And the second source is the combustion of solid fuels. Just like any other industry, this industry burns solid fuels, which include wood residue and coal and so on. And I won't get into the efforts to reduce, but Leif will be talking about the second one here, and Troy will be talking about the first one, the efforts to reduce dioxins both in bleaching and from combustion sources. Okay, so I wrap it up with this summary table here, which is going to be released in November by EPA. And what this basically does is to put it in perspective as to what are we talking about on a national basis in terms of the releases of dioxin to the atmosphere or to the environment. And right from the top down, the very first one may be revised possibly downwards. There's some discussion going on that. The Portland cement manufacture, then you got municipal waste incineration, secondary copper smelters, coal combustion, and so on and so forth. And forest fires is right here, and residential wood combustion. And like I said, there's probably about 15, 20 other sources that are listed on the table, but they're all smaller and smaller. The total as of now is about close to 4 kilograms or 4,000 grams of TEQs. And to put that in perspective, from the pulp bleaching sector itself, the latest compilation, which is a year and a half old, the last one is yet to come out, as of 1994, the pulp bleaching is all three vectors, which is the pulp and the sludge and the effluent, is less than 2.5 ounces. And I believe that number is a lot lower today because a lot of the mills have gone to chlorine dioxide from chlorine and substituted that. So I want to leave you with an idea of what are the national emissions, and what are we talking about in terms of the pulp and paper industry's contribution to that national emissions. Thank you.
I was going to give a quick overview from Weave's perspective about dioxin, and perhaps a little bit more of layman's terms about what dioxin is. As Arun said, that it's a family of 75 chemicals, and they're part of a larger family of chemicals called organochlorines. Now, organochlorines are formed when elemental chlorine combines with organic molecules. And most of those organic molecules contain carbon. And as he also said, dioxin is never manufactured intentionally. It's a byproduct of many manufacturing processes. And it's a chemical contaminant of industrial processes using chlorine or bromine, or when organic matter is burned in the presence of chlorine. So there are three things that are necessary for dioxins to be formed. One is a source of chlorine. Two, the presence of dioxin precursors such as organic matter or aromatic hydrocarbons. So organic matter is really the key factor here. And then a thermally or a reactive environment where these materials can combine. When we talk about dioxins, we really should be actually, when we're talking about the health effects and risks to public health, not limiting the discussion to dioxins. We should be discussing all forms of organochlorines, because all of them have the potential serious health effects. And I say potential because some may and some may not. Some have them and some may not. And it's hard, of course, in a situation when we have different people talking about different things to talk about sources. The information that I have says that the pulp and paper industry is responsible for 11% of the dioxin produced in the country. And I have references for that if anybody wants them. The four main sources, the four primary sources that we have referenced from the work that we have done, first come from the burning of chlorine in the presence of certain precursors to dioxin, such as organic matter or lignin in wood, or chemicals with similar structures. The second source, as I mentioned, is the pulp and paper industry, where chlorine is used to bleach the pulp. The third is the manufacture of PVC plastic, or polyvinyl chloride, chlorinated solvents, and pesticides. And the fourth is metal smelters, refineries, and cement kilns. Dioxin is a very toxic and persistent chemical. It is also a known carcinogen. Current scientific evidence supports the conclusion that there is no threshold for the toxic effects of dioxin. More importantly, the debate around the thresholds has been made moot by the finding that the average background body burden level, or amount of dioxin in the body of the average U.S. population, is close to the levels that have been found to cause health problems. Therefore, even if a threshold did exist, we have already passed it. So the whole debate about whether there's a safe amount is moot. And I think I'll just keep it at that. I'll shorten.
I'm Vicki Watson from the University of Montana, and I was asked to come in and say a little bit about some of the recent work on dioxin and other chlorinated hydrocarbons, about some of the health effects and environmental effects of those. And what I said in 5 minutes, you know, a professor can't say anything in 5 minutes, but what I thought I'd do essentially is put in a plug for a good friend of mine's book. One of my favorite people is Theo Colburn, who was here at the university a number of years ago talking about some other research that she did. But what she's been doing for the last few years for, I think, the World Wildlife Fund, or one of those such organizations, is essentially writing a book that I think may turn out to be as important as Silent Spring. This book is called Our Stolen Future, and it is a book that tries to synthesize a lot of different studies, wildlife studies, studies that looked at declining wildlife populations, that looked at wildlife populations that seem to have a lot of abnormal organisms in there, deformed organisms, that also looked at studies of all sorts of human disabilities and problems, looked at the levels of PCBs and dioxins in the blood of mothers whose children then showed various types of learning disorders or things of that sort. A whole series of wildlife studies, epidemiological human studies, and laboratory studies in which everything from rats to monkeys were exposed to various types of chlorinated hydrocarbons, and studies of those effects. This particular book represents a collaboration of this scientist, Theo Colburn, a public policy scientist and a scientific writer. The job of the scientific writer was to make this understandable to all of us, and I think she did a very good job. The science writer did that. But essentially this synthetic work then comes to a few main conclusions that I've tried to summarize. It shows that we focus far too much on adult cancers in setting standards to protect public health and the environment. It turns out that at much lower concentrations than those that cause cancer, many synthetic chemicals, and that includes dioxin, PCBs, furans, and a whole host of pesticides and plastics that are used in all sorts of consumer products. A whole host of these chemicals disrupt hormones and normal development of fetuses and infants. That is, at concentration orders of magnitude below the concentrations that cause cancer in adults or that cause other types of health problems in adults. Can have no effect on an adult at all, and if a fetus or infant is exposed to it through the mother, through the placenta, or through the mother's milk, that developing organism will then show disorders in later life. It may, at certain concentrations, there may be obvious birth defects at birth, but at very, very low concentrations, then the effects will show up later in life. And those include, as I said, impairing the reproductive and immune and nervous systems. If you interfere with development, if you cause abnormal development, it may not show up as a missing arm as it did with thalidomide. Instead, it shows up later as impaired reproductive and immune and nervous systems, and at very, very, very low concentration, these nervous system effects may show up as learning disabilities and behavioral disorders. And in fact, at concentrations that these effects, there seems to be good evidence, and nothing is ever proven absolutely in science. There's only the preponderance of the scientific evidence. There seems to be good evidence that at the concentrations that currently exist in the human population in the United States, that these effects could occur. I mean, at similar concentrations in the rats and monkeys, they saw these effects, and then we find these same concentrations in humans already. So far, 51 chemicals have been found to disrupt hormones, and many more suspected. These include dioxins, PCBs, furans, DDT and its breakdown products, atrazine, and many other common pesticides. Or chlorinated hydrocarbons, and the list that has been found so far is listed here in the book. What are the concentrations of concern? It's often been pointed out that the concentrations in the environment are way too low to be of concern, and in the water, the concentrations tend to be at the parts per trillion or even parts per quadrillion level, these incredibly low levels, but up the food chain, those concentrations are magnified 1,000,000-fold, and that brings them back to concentrations of parts per billion and parts per trillion. And these chemicals exert their effect in the human body and in other living things at the parts per trillion level. So that means we're already at the concentrations that cause these effects, as Bryony mentioned earlier, particularly for these developmental effects. There have been a couple of scientific panels that have met to comment on this, one a few years ago, 21 prominent scientists, and just this year another panel of 18 scientists. met and released a report that there is growing evidence that these common environmental pollutants at their current levels in the environment and in human tissue can interfere with development, reduce intelligence, and cause learning disorders. There's also growing evidence linking them to infertility, breast and prostate cancer, and many other diseases. The recommendations of the scientific panel include, well, these I've got a bunch of handouts up here, which those who are most interested can come and pick these up. One of the things that you'll find on it that looks very interesting is how different these chemicals look from the hormones that they mimic or that they interfere with. Human hormone, the estrogen and testosterone hormones are shown here on this page, and also DDT and diethylstilbestrol, the synthetic or artificial estrogen that caused the DES daughter phenomenon that we all heard about. But these other chemicals, they just look like all different sorts of things. We saw the pictures of dioxins and furans. They don't look anything like these hormones. And so it was nobody suspected that this could occur, except it was measured all the way back in 1950 that DDT interferes with the normal development of chickens. The synthetic rooster. In 1950, it was known that DDT any longer.
I've got a difficult subject. I want to talk to you about bleaching tonight. About what we're doing out at the mill, some of the Dioxin testing that we've done there. About 75% of it is brown like this, 25% of it is white. It's brown on one side and white on the other. And we have to bleach pulp to make this white top on this material. And the pulp we bleach about 200 tons a day out of the 2,000 tons a day. And so what we end up with is a very small bleach plant in a very large brown paper mill. That's very unusual in the industry. Mostly in the industry you find bleach mills that are very large bleach mills, and all they do is bleach pulp. So how do we bleach pulp anyway? Here's a bleaching sequence at Missoula. We start off with unbleached pulp over here, and let me even back up for a second there. Unbleached pulp is the fiber that's in wood. When we get wood in the mill, it contains fiber, or cellulose and hemicellulose, and it contains lignin, or glue that holds those fibers together. And what we'll do is our main process at the mill, is to remove that lignin from the fiber so that the fibers are free and we can reform them into a sheet of paper. And we get rid of the lignin and the glue, pull it out of the process, wash it away from the fiber, and then burn it in a recovery boiler. Some of that pulp then, most of the pulp goes to making brown paper, but some of the pulp goes to the bleach plant, and that's what we refer to when we talk about unbleached pulp. It's fiber that a lot of the lignin has been removed from it, but not all of it. Since the 1900s, or through the 1900s, what the industry has found is that chlorine is a very effective chemical in removing more lignin from the fiber than could be removed in the process. It does that, and it's a fairly selective chemical, so it leaves the fiber alone, okay? And it attacks the lignin that's there and breaks it down so that it becomes water soluble, and it gets removed in the process. Unfortunately, when it does that, it also reacts with the organic material there, and that's where the dioxin is formed that you hear about in bleaching, or most of it anyway. Okay, so what we're doing at the first part of the bleaching stage is we're removing the lignin, and as we go through the bleaching stage, then we'll remove lignin, but as we remove lignin, that fiber there is becoming more and more just cellulose or just fiber, and it gets more and more difficult to get the lignin out of it, and this lignin is what gives the fiber the color, you see. So what we have to do is we have to become very, very selective about getting the lignin off the fiber, but not damaging the fiber so it's still strong, and it has a bright color, is what we believe it's required from the market. So this next stage here is a hypochlorite stage. It's a chlorine bleaching agent that you'd use in your home, and this next stage is a hypochlorite stage. Both of them use chlorine. And the last stage here, this D represents chlorine dioxide, or another chlorine-containing compound that is very selective and brightens the pulp, removes the color from the lignins, but doesn't deteriorate the fiber. So what we're doing here then is this is a very weird position. We're trying to make the required brightness that we believe is demanded of us. We're trying to meet the strength needs for the paper, okay? For this paper, and once again, this paper that we make is used to make in boxes, okay? I didn't say that before, but so its main job is to be strong. And then we also are trying to maximize yield, and yield is what we're trying to do is get the most fiber we can from the wood that we're using. Okay, does everybody follow that? Okay, so what happens in that process is we're using this chlorine, and as you've heard before, when you use chlorine in the presence of organics, what you'd expect to find is dioxin. And here's a summary of the test results. Test results done at the Missoula mill, and these what we have, let me just explain this chart to you. The first column is the date, the second column is the location. The first stage and second stage refers to the 2 effluent streams that leave the bleach plant. Those are the effluent streams that leave the bleach plant. Okay, over across the top here we have the different dioxins and furans in increasing chlorinated substitution. So we have 4 substituted dioxins, 5, 6, 7, and 8, and it's the total of all of them that we measured. And by the way, these samples are collected by us in the right infiltrate of the bleach plant, and they're sent with strict procedures to an outside testing laboratory. And this is some of the results, and I believe they're out of the record because they're required in our discharge permit. Okay, what about the results then? Look through the chart. Most of the information there shows ND, and that means not detect. And but what are the units? What's the significance of not detect? That means that for the test that they're running, they're trying to measure concentrations in the low parts per quadrillion. Vicki mentioned that. It's a very, very small number. It's 1 part in that number with 15 zeros behind it. One way to look at it might be 1 second in something like 31 million years. So we're talking about very small concentrations. And of course you might say, well, yeah, but look, there's still dioxins there, and I believe that there are dioxins there, okay? I'm not trying to say that there aren't. I'm saying that the concentration is very, very low. In a bleach plant like ours, you would expect for those numbers to be much, much higher. In fact, even in the range in the parts per trillion. But they're not. They're very much lower. And our process is similar to other processes. So we certainly use chlorine, and the chlorine stages are similar to other stages. So why aren't there dioxins present, or why are there so few dioxins there? Well, in order to form precursors, and you heard Bryony and Vicki mention this, you've got to have something that you've got to have precursors present. And those are the molecules that are similar to the dioxin molecule that the chlorine is going to substitute on in order to form dioxin. Well, since they've discovered dioxin in a bleach plant, they started searching for where these precursors come from. And the first one is mineral and defoamer. And defoamer is a chemical that we use further up in the process that we use to maintain, to control foam. And it was found out that there were a lot of precursors in this defoamer. And so what we did is we, just like every other bleach plant in the industry, immediately went out and found another source of something that would control the foam without these precursors present. The second thing is precursors come from the environment. And although there's not a lot of information about this, if you look at the water that the Missoula mill uses, we're pulling water out of the aquifer 200 feet down below the mill to use in this bleach plant, and I suspect it's fairly pristine Montana water. If you would compare that to a mill, say, down in on the Savannah River down south someplace that's pulling water out of that river that's fairly contaminated, they may have quite a few more dioxins present and that would mix with the chlorine and form dioxins. So it's a plus because Montana's in a fairly uncontaminated place. Wood. As it turns out, there are dioxin precursors in wood, and you can't get away from that. And I'm sure that there are dioxins coming into the mill in wood. One of the things about it, though, is that they're particularly present in compression wood. And as it turns out, although we hadn't planned it that way, in 1993, the Missoula mill started up a very specialized, state-of-the-art process that removes knots from our wood that we use in the mill. We pull out about a truckload of knots a day, and the reason we did it is for the quality of the paper that we use. So there may be a chance that those precursors are more present in that knot wood, and we're pulling that knot material away from the process, and therefore depriving the process of precursors and lowering the possibility of making dioxin. Okay, so that kind of gives you a little background of what the mill's doing right now. Our technology is fairly old. We're not making a lot of dioxin, it looks like, at least not compared to a lot of other bleach mills, and our bleach mill is very small. But the things are changing very fast. The Environmental Protection Agency has come up with a new set of rules for us to operate by, and those rules come under the heading of what we call cluster rules. And cluster rules are going to affect the pulp and paper industry all over, but in particularly it's going to have a big impact on bleaching. And what it's going to do, basically the way they're proposed right now, is in the next 3 years or maybe 3.5 years, we're going to be forced or required by law to change our bleaching process to something that's elemental chlorine free. That means that we won't be able to use chlorine in that position that I showed you at our bleaching sequence before. It also means that we won't be able to use the hypochlorite in the next 2 positions after that. Do you remember that, the CHH? So we can't use any of those chemicals anymore, but it's still going to allow the use of chlorine dioxide. And that's a pretty sensitive subject, I know, especially to this group here, and so I wanted to address it just a little bit. I'm not a representative of the EPA, and I'm not really a representative of the pulp and paper industry, but I have read a lot about it, and I've read a lot of the technical journals that come along, and let me try to give you some reasons why I think that they chose to allow elemental chlorine-free pulping and not totally chlorine-free pulping. 3 minutes? I need 25. Leaf doesn't care. Maybe we ought to have a special session mediated between me and Leaf first. Okay, so here we have elemental chlorine-free, some of the advantages, and totally chlorine-free, some of the advantages. One of them uses chlorine dioxide, and the other one basically doesn't. That's what it comes down to. Both of them have undetectable dioxin, although the case could be argued that totally chlorine-free certainly has undetectable dioxin because there isn't any chlorine there. ECF has good pulp strength. Remember, we use chlorine dioxide at the end of that brightening stage, and we do that because it's very selective, and it's a tough chemical to replace for what it does. There's processes out there, but in general, my understanding is that based on the processes to go totally chlorine-free right now, that you would lose pulp strength. Good wood yield versus poor wood yield. Once again, as you bleach the pulp and you try to get it bright, if you destroy the fiber there, the amount of fiber that you get for the amount of wood that you use goes down. And the processes that are available right now will most probably lower the yield of wood that we'd see. For ECF, it's going to be more difficult to close up the mill. And there's a lot of talk in the industry about trying to get rid of having an effluent, trying to keep all the effluent in the mill. And we're admittedly quite a ways away from that because the technology demands are fairly high, but I think the industry is kind of tired of getting beat up about effluent, and it would be a nice thing not to have any effluent anymore. So there's a lot of talk in the industry about that. But if you use a lot of chlorine dioxide in your bleach plant, it's going to be tough to do because you're going to have a lot of chlorides in your process, and you got to get rid of them somehow. So if you were to go to a totally chlorine-free system, it would be a lot easier to close up the process because you wouldn't have to worry about those chlorides. Totally chlorine-free processes right now, the capital involved to change to them is you know, it's a much higher cost, and the operating costs are higher too. And one other reason it doesn't really come up too much, you don't hear a lot about it, and it's a little unfortunate, but elemental chlorine-free, when you use chlorine dioxide, that stuff has been tested like crazy. I mean, books have been written. We know a lot about chlorides and organic material and what they do to us, and there's a lot of debate about the concentrations that are a problem. But there's a lot of new processes coming out in a totally chlorine-free process, is that the information isn't as clear. So that's one thing to bear in mind, and I welcome you to do some research in that area or try to find out some information there too, because it's not quite as straightforward as it might seem. But once again, I'm not trying to represent anybody or try to tell you anything, but that's just what's going on. Those are some of the reasons why the EPA chose to go to ECF instead of TCF for right now. Why does chlorine dioxide not make as much dioxin? Well, as you use chlorine dioxide to replace chlorine in that first bleaching stage, there's not as much chlorine present because chlorine dioxide has basically 5 times the power to bleach per amount of chlorine that you're using. So as you use chlorine dioxide, you don't have as much chlorine present, and when you're making these chlorinated hydrocarbons and stuff like that, what you're looking at is a highly substituted type molecule with lots of chlorine. So the less chlorine you have there, the less chance you have of making a highly chlorinated molecule, which tend to be the more toxic molecules. That's why you get some people saying that the toxicity of totally chlorine-free and elemental chlorine-free processes are similar, although, once again, that's highly debated. So what are our options then? Well, we sat down and we thought about it, and we know that we got to comply to these new rules in the next 3 years or so. And what are we going to do? Well, we really kind of narrowed it down to 2 choices. We can shut down the bleach plant and just make brown paper. That's one thing we hate to do. It is 25% of our product, and it's a product line that actually, believe it or not, is increasing. It's one that it really contributes to the viability of the mill, one we'd really hate to lose. On the other hand, we could modify the bleach plant and to meet the cluster rules. What does that mean? How am I doing? He hasn't stood up yet? I'm going to go really fast here. You could spend a lot of time on this subject. I'm serious, a lot of time. It sort of looks like alphabet soup here. These are some of the options that we've been looking at. I can't even really get at them very much, but I can tell you that the CHHD is our current sequence, and the other sequences appear to be allowed by law, except maybe this one with that H there with the hypochlorite probably won't be allowed. And the O's there are oxygen delignification, the Z's are ozone treatment, the P's are peroxide, which is very common to use in trying to make less chlorine in bleaching. The two asterisk sequences there are two that we're right now have pulp in the laboratory studying to try to find out if we can make the strength that's required for our paper and still meet the market demand that we see for the brightness, and try to come up with some costs and to try to identify what's going to happen there. I'm not saying those are the sequences we're going to end up with, but those are the two that look most promising right now. So what are we going to do? What do we keep in mind when we look at these different processes? Of course, we want to meet the rules and regulations that the government sets. We want to be confident in the technology that we pick up. We want to make sure that we can do it. We don't want to build a plant and not have it run. Both we look at cost, both to build the process and to operate the process. We look at the environmental impacts and what we expect the market conditions might be in the future. And also, as future regulations, if we expect them to be tightened up in the future, then that would affect our opinion also. In summary, then, the Missoula bleach plant generates surprisingly little dioxin. The EPA proposed cluster rules. They're going to probably require ECF, and that will result in undetectable dioxins in the bleach plant. And number three is that the Missoula mill is actively right now looking at ways that we can comply with those rules. That's it.
Well, I understand I have, instead of 15 minutes, now 11 minutes, so I was wondering if I could change the ground rules and go before Troy. My name's Leif Griffin. I'm an environmental engineer out at Stone Container. I'm a Montana native. I have degrees in chemical and environmental engineering. And I'm here tonight, chat a little bit about the waste fuel boiler. Before I get started, I'd just like to point out that we did provide overheads, copies of all of our overheads for people that don't have them. There are some out in the lobby. As far as today, tonight I'd like to chat about is the process parameters and emission control equipment on the waste fuel boiler, a little bit about the fuels in the waste fuel boiler, and follow up with a qualitative risk assessment that we contracted out so that we could evaluate, have a better understanding of the potential health risk of emissions from the waste fuel boiler. The waste fuel boiler is a piece of process equipment out at Stone Container, a rather large piece of process equipment. Its primary purpose is to produce steam for use in the mill. At design capacities, it produces 450,000 pounds of steam per hour. In the combustion zone, temperature of 2,000 to 2,200 degrees Fahrenheit. And the combustion zone is the area in the boiler of the grate where the fuel sits on top of the grate to be combusted. And like I said, it's at 2,000 to 2,200 degrees Fahrenheit, which is very warm with sufficient proven temperatures to bust organic material. The primary fuel that we burn is wood residue, And the ability to burn wood residue saves approximately 4 billion cubic feet of natural gas a year. The Missoula Mill is concerned about atmospheric emissions from all of the process equipment, not just the waste fuel boiler. Some of the pollution control equipment that we have on the boiler includes a boiler operation. If it is operated well, we have a good temperature in the grate as part of the operating conditions, we're going to be combusting that organic material. There are also multi-clones in the boiler. And if you can think of those as cyclonic separators that are used to separate the heavier particulate from the fly ash and the gaseous stream, and that heavy particulate is then re-injected back into the combustion zone for further burning. And finally, there are Venturi scrubbers. We have 2 Venturi scrubbers on the boiler. What you see is all the moisture in that area. It's from the water in the Venturi scrubbers. And the Venturi scrubbers are highly efficient for particulate removal. They are somewhere in the neighborhood of 90 to 97, 98% efficient for particulate removal. And that is important when you're considering dioxins. Dioxins typically tend to be as a particulate or adsorbed to particulate. They have an affinity for particulate of 10 to 1 to the gaseous phase. So the idea there is that the majority of the dioxins are going to be as particulate, and a majority of them are going to be removed in the Venturi scrubber. A little bit about the fuel permitted for combustion. The majority of the fuel we burn is wood residue, as hog fuel, wood chips, sawdust. It's basically waste wood. We're also permitted to burn natural gas and fuel oil. And these last 2, I'm going to focus my presentation on, are the OCC plant rejects, which is cardboard and plastic. The OCC plant, most of you folks are probably aware that we have a recycling facility at the Missoula Mill. We recycle approximately 400 tons per day of cardboard. We take old used cardboard and repulp it and make new cardboard out of it. In the process of making the new cardboard, there's a couple of reject streams. One is an inorganic reject streams that's primarily metals, staples, banding wire that is taken to the landfill and buried. The other one is an organic reject stream, and that consists primarily of cardboard and plastic. That material is sent to the waste fuel boiler to be burned to regain that heating value to make more steam. The other source, and I'll talk about these more later on, we also collect fiber from our wastewater treatment system. The fiber is present and reclaimed from the primary clarifier. It is then sent to our brand new dewatering facility, which is just currently coming online. We don't quite have it going yet, but as soon as that is going, we're going to take that dewatered fiber and also send it to the waste fuel boiler to reclaim that the potential heating value from that dewatered fiber. To give you an idea of the solid fuels combusted in the waste fuel boiler, I have a list here of the wood residue, the dewatered fiber, the OCC rejects, the permitted amounts, and the typical amounts burned. You can see that the wood residue at 1,265 tons per day is by far the most fuel that we burn at the boiler at 96.6%. The dewatered fiber just makes 30 tons per day, makes up 2.3%, and the OCC rejects is 0.8%. You can see our permitted amounts is quite a bit higher than our typical amounts at 60 tons per day of dewatered fiber and OCC rejects at 15 tons per day. Now, the Missoula Mill understands that there are public concerns about burning chlorides from these two streams, the burning the dewatered fiber and burning of the OCC rejects, because of the chloride present and the potential for dioxin and furan formation and emissions from the waste fuel boiler. And those are the two main things I'd like to chat about. First of all, the sources of chloride in the dewatered fiber, of course, comes from our bleach plant that Troy so finely described. And there's also a concern of burning the trace amount of dioxins that may be in that dewatered fiber. Now, there's sufficient technical studies that have been performed that have shown that the trace dioxins are going to be combusted and destructed in that combustion zone at that 2,000 to 2,200 degrees. So that we believe that the dioxins are not going to pass through the boiler that were in the dewatered fiber. Now, there is potential that during the destruction of those trace dioxins, there's going to be a chloride, still as hydrogen chloride in the as products of incomplete combustions, and that can produce dioxin past in the post-combustion zone. So they are reformed. But so that there's the two sources for the chloride or the trace dioxin and the chloride from the dewatered fiber and the burning of the OCC rejects. There are chlorides in the polyvinyl chloride that's going to the waste fuel boiler. So as a means to address the concerns with the chloride and the potential to form dioxin, what we put together was a chloride balance, if you will. And you can see here that in wood residue from trees, from inland bark, and that's from bark in Montana, in this area here, typically it'll contain 60 to 1,000 ppm of chloride. In coastal bark, in Washington and Oregon area, you'll have typically an average of 5,000 ppm of chloride. The wood residue that we burn at the Missoula Mill will vary, but it'll typically run about 200 ppm chloride. Now, the wood residue, based on the 15 tons per day of OCC and 0.14% chloride, it's going to add a total of another 45 ppm of chloride. So you're going to have a total of 245 ppm of chloride. You can see here that the wood residue and the dewatered fiber is going to add, additional 63 ppm of chloride. And I think the thing that you folks should take away from this is that the wood residue, the OCC rejects, the dewatered fiber is at 311 ppm chloride. That is well within the range for the inland bark. So the amount of chloride that's being added with the OCC rejects and the dewatered fiber is not going to increase, be above what you typically expect in inland bark. So therefore, that the potential for dioxins to be formed isn't going to be an overall increase due to burning those materials. And I'm going to have to skip a few slides here, but there are some test results evident. The National Council that Arun is with have produced test results to support this. And as a means to address our concerns and to address the concerns of the public, we did an outside, had a contract to do a qualitative risk assessment of these two scenarios. Combustion of wood waste with dioxin fiber, combustion of wood waste with OCC rejects. And they went through and did the risk assessment as a qualitative risk assessment based on typical EPA guidelines. I'm going to jump through to the very end of this. I have a bunch of other overheads that I can share with you about specifically about the assumptions and how that risk assessment was performed, but I'm afraid I'm going to get cut off here. So I like to jump right to the results. In case one, which is the wood residue and dewater fiber, the ambient concentration that was found using conservative dispersion models, using EPA-approved models, came out to be a ground level concentration of combined dioxin and furans of 3.7 times 10 to the minus 9th micrograms per cubic meter. What that provides, this is a maximum individual cancer response of 1 in 10 million. That means that due to that concentration, that there is an excess cancer of what can be found at background concentrations, which is 1 in 3. There's an excess of 1 in 10 million. The EPA typical guidelines for target risk assessments are 1 in 10,000 to 1 in a million. Those are EPA target risk assessment numbers. You can see this is less than 1 in 10 million. Case 2, which is wood residue and OCC rejects, will provide ambient concentrations of worst case scenario of 3.9 times 10 to the minus 11 micrograms per cubic meter. And this has a individual cancer response of less than 1 in 1 billion. Okay? So I think the thing that you need to take away from this is that, yes, the potential is there for dioxins to be emitted from the waste fuel boiler. From previous test results from Nikasi, those dioxin emissions are very low, and the expected health effects from those as far as cancer is also very low. And I don't want to minimize or to minimize the potential threat, because that, even though those health risks are there, they are very low, but I don't want to minimize them. But I would like to put them in perspective with some typical health risks that people occur in everyday living. And what I have here are some of the familiar activities which might increase the chances of death.
We have to wrap it up pretty soon.
This is my last one. So this is familiar activities with increased chances of death that will, of 1 in a million chances of causing death. The first one is traveling 300 miles by car. We have 1 in a million of chance of having an accident and dying. Flying 1,000 miles by jet. Receiving 1 chest x-ray. Drinking 30 12-ounce cans of diet soda, and that's in a lifetime. Or smoking 1.4 cigarettes in a lifetime will provide an excess cancer risk of 1 in a million. Okay, well, thanks for letting me present tonight.
Thank you, Leif, and thank you for being patient with me. Annie, the next section of the agenda has to do with advocates for alternatives. And Annie will lead off with this one with 5 minutes, followed by Dr. Garen Smith, 5 minutes. Time goes fast, so.
just to keep things going, I'll stand here. First, I'd like to thank, again, the participants and organizers of the Roundtable. I really see this as a useful process. I feel it provides an opportunity to discuss, even if it's briefly, the issues of concern instead of just the positions and ultimatums that we usually banter about in the press. Despite, I have a disclaimer that's brand new, I guess. Despite the hard-to-spell last name, I'm not a hard-hitting chlorine dioxide expert. I consider myself to be a concerned citizen, and I hope that the one thing we can agree on tonight is to continue to discuss and work on these issues. As you will hear from the other participants, the U.S. pulp and paper industry stands at a dioxin crossroads. One road involves the continued use of chlorine and production of dioxin and other toxic pollutants. This is the part that I'm going to discuss. It's the bad news. The other road is totally chlorine-free. There is serious concern with the substituting of chlorine dioxide for elemental chlorine in the bleaching process. I'm just going to discuss the bleaching process, not the other hog fuel boiler and combustion issues. The concern is that it merely removes some of the chlorine, not at all, from the same problematic bleaching process. It's a substitution of chemical, not a change in the process. In 1993, the American Public Health Association urged U.S. industries to stop using chlorine. It did this by saying that the only feasible and prudent approach to eliminating the release and discharge of chlorinated organic chemicals and consequent exposure to chlorinated organic compounds. The problems with the proposed cluster rules and the cluster rules endorsement of chlorine dioxide substitution versus totally chlorine-free bleaching, this argument can be reduced for the purpose of my brief discussion to an economic argument, or cliche, depending on how you look at it. We can pay now, or we can pay later. If it's later, the concern is that toxic pollution results in greater environmental costs, greater health and safety costs, and greater costs to taxpayers and even corporate profit margin. Chlorine dioxide bleaching, even at high substitution levels, does not eliminate the production and release of dangerous organic chlorines. As we know from the use of elemental chlorine, non-detection of dioxin does not mean non-existence, even if it's surprisingly little dioxin. This is particularly true in air emissions, a test that we don't really see at Stone Container's Frenchtown mill. I'm going to look, I don't have much time, I'm sure, a very cursory list of the concerns in 3 sections. First, environmental problems. Chlorine dioxide is not elemental chlorine-free. It's not an ECF technology because elemental chlorine is produced as a side reaction during the on-site production of chlorine dioxide and during the bleaching operations. As we have heard, humans and other animals already have high enough levels of dioxin to cause harmful effects. A reduction of some kinds of dioxin, we don't even know the extent to which it reduces all the kinds of dioxin, chlorine dioxide that is. By switching to chlorine dioxide, this switch will not improve our health. It actually makes it worse by adding to the cumulative impacts of the levels that already exist in our bodies. Number 2, health and safety, an issue I'm particularly interested in our community. Chlorine dioxide is on the hazardous substances list. It's regulated by OSHA and EPA. Chlorine dioxide must be produced on site because it's, quote, violently explosive in air concentrations over 10% and can be ignited by almost any form of energy, including sunlight, heat, or sparks. This is according to the New Jersey Department of Health. Thanks. OSHA's allowable airborne concentrations to protect worker health and safety for chlorine dioxide is 1/10 that of chlorine gas. This is particularly frightening given our community members who were injured in the chlorine gas spill last spring. Chlorine dioxide is not an incremental step towards chlorine-free. On the economic level, it requires a capital investment that becomes obsolete when further pollution prevention becomes inevitable. Chlorine dioxide bleaching relies on end-of-the-pipe controls. This in the stone mill is the water treatment plant and the waste fuel boiler and the post-combustion issue. Pollution prevention is effective when there's a focus on process modification instead of end-of-pipe controls. We're not seeing this process modification by substituting one chlorine bleaching element for another chlorine bleaching element. When we use end-of-the-pipe controls, the additional costs incurred with this control of dioxin include monitoring, regulatory oversight, permit violations and penalties, accidental releases, cleanup costs, etc. In the Missoula Valley, the best we can hope for with a substitution for chlorine dioxide, is a reduction of dioxin and other pollutants from the mill. With a totally chlorine-free plant, we can expect much better. The question we are left with after the presentations that we've heard from Stone, where does this leave us with the decisions that Stone has already made or will be making regarding the substitution of chlorine dioxide versus a chlorine-free mill?
I like to use visual aids, so I'll slip back to the overhead projector here. My particular assignment for tonight was to talk about alternatives to burning PVC plastics. So I listed some of the alternatives here. One of them is don't recycle cardboard. That's a bad idea because we're supposed to be using things more than once, and it renders obsolete a large investment on the part of Stone. Secondly, we could just take what's being sent as OCC rejects to the waste fuel boiler and instead send it to the BFI landfill up on the hillside. But that's going to cost Stone money to fill it there, and it's going to have a heavy impact on the landfill life. So we come down to choices number 3 and 4 if we want to try to reduce the PVC plastic burning, and I guess that's a process alteration as opposed to an end-of-the-pipe change, and that's the sort of thing that I would like to help work on it from a community standpoint. One thing we could do is try to separate out the plastics from the cardboard that comes out of the OCC plant. In talking with some of the Stone personnel over the last couple years, it sounds like it might be feasible to do some of this with the new dewatering facility that's just being put online right now. If we were able to get the plastics out and send only them to the landfill, that would be much less landfilling than taking the entire OCC rejects, so that would be good. And if new technology is available that lets us reprocess those plastics, come up with separation techniques so those resins could be reused, then that's another form of recycling that we can build into the process. So I hope that we can explore that one. Finally, there's something that maybe all of us can do, and that's to eliminate PVC containing cardboard from the sources that go to the old cardboard container recycling. What it means, though, is that we need to educate ourselves as to where PVC is in packaging. And I'll have to admit right up front that I'm completely ignorant as to where the PVC is that comes in the products that get recycled out there. One caution is that if you have to process the feed stream more, it could increase the cost to Stone of that particular material. So if we could have the lights back on, I just thought I'd show you the box that my new laptop computer came in, and if you just toss that into a trash compactor or a bundler to be sent for recycling, look at all the different kinds of plastics you run into. So here's a label that says that it's a Zenith computer. That's one kind of plastic. And then there's this handle that's a nice carrying case, and it's retained with yet a second kind of clear colored plastic on the bottom side. And then there's this invoice pocket, and then there's a sealing tape, and there's these labels, some of which have plastic covers. So I guess it would be good for us as a community to try to start educating people as to what sorts of PVC products are used in cardboard packaging, so we can try to remove those before we take it to Missoula Recycling, and try to disseminate that information in the Chicago area or wherever Stone is buying their material. I think it's a very proactive process, alteration that can help reduce what PVC might get through the recycling plant.
Thank you, Dr. Smith. The next two speakers on the agenda, I understand, have been switched back just opposite. So Archie will lead off, followed by Dr. Singh. You have 23 minutes.
For my part of the presentation, I'm not going to use any overheads. I don't have any slides to present. And I want to talk about things in the world perspective. I want to bring the world down to Missoula today and kind of give you some ideas as the kinds of things that companies like Stone have to contend with, but also to talk about some of the things that are happening in the world markets that we all will have to contend with. I guess one of the first things I want to talk about is there's a lot of pressure on manufacturing that are using any chlorine or chlorine-containing compounds. One of the biggest pressures that are coming are from regulators, but it's also coming from those in government that have something to do with research. The International Joint Commission on the Great Lakes for the past 8 biennials, which is the last 16 years, has asked for the sunsetting of chlorine and chlorine-containing compounds. The International Joint Commission recently put out its 8th biannual report, and in this biannual report again they're calling for a timetable to set the use of chlorine and chlorine-containing compounds. Chlorine-containing compounds such as chlorine dioxide as industrial feedstocks. So this means reducing or eliminating these wherever they can be used. So the bigger picture here is how do companies that are going to be putting in new systems contend with these kinds of regulations that are in the horizon? How do we protect companies that are making these choices today from making the wrong choice? We hope we can do it through education, and that's where the Chlorine Free Products Association is spending most of its time. One of the big issues here that doesn't seem to be talked about much is that in these processes, in using chlorine and chlorine-containing compounds, one of the problems that we have are the overall problem of water quality in organochlorines. When we talk about using best available technology and we say that we want to substitute one chlorine compound for another, we certainly do reduce the amount of dioxins that we're creating. We do reduce the amount of AOX that we're creating. And I want to bring up a term that we haven't used here tonight, which is AOX, which is absorbable organic halides. That's a measurement of the amount of chlorinated organics that are in the wastewater of the mills using chlorine compounds. The reason I want to bring that up is because the dioxin issue seems to be one that is kind of slipping down, because as we make these changes in processes, the amount of dioxins that we're creating certainly are being reduced. And when we say that they're at non-detect levels, the pulp and paper industry has done a great job of reducing the amount of dioxins that they're creating. But we haven't done a good enough job in totally eliminating the amount of dioxins that could be created if we go into a totally chlorine-free process. So I think it's important that when we're going to make a step, that we make a step all the way to eliminate the issue and not just try to reduce the issue, especially when we have other things that are being brought about, which are regulations that would require the sunsetting of chlorine and chlorine-containing compounds. And if we've already spent a lot of money on that, it would be awful hard for us to make that switch. Some of the things that I want to talk about more today are the market and what's going on in the market. World markets are kind of interesting, and us in the United States and in Canada are participants in that world market. Today, there was a study that was presented in 1996 in June by a company called EMNG, and what EMNG is telling us is that They started in 1994 and took a look at what's going on in the world markets. What they're saying is that in the European community, or currently today, what they're saying is that the North American market, which is Canada and the United States as producers, control around 35% of the world markets. We're that large of a producer. And the Western Europe community produces about 33% of that entire world market. And then the Asian market, or producers, produce about 12%, and then it goes a little smaller as it goes down. What they're saying is that with the increase in production and capacity that's going on worldwide, in 1999, which is only 3 years from now, production in Western Europe will surpass production in the U.S. In 1999, with the increase in production that's coming about, the Western European market will produce 35% of the pulp and paper that's produced and used in the world. Asia will produce 33% of what is going to be produced and used in the world. And North America will produce 21% of what is going to be used and produced around the world. All of the companies I'm talking, or the countries that I'm talking about, have modern pulp bleaching processes, which means the first thing that they've done, they've put oxygen delignification in as that very first step. In Europe, all of the increased capacities that are coming on, which are roughly 2 million tons of capacity, are going to be producing that totally chlorine-free. So if we're going to produce what we are considering best available technology, and we're going to be setting guidelines for substituting one chemical for another, and try to compete in a world market where our less than modern pulp bleaching processes are going to have to compete, we're going to be losing an advantage and an edge because we're no longer going to be the low-cost environmental producers in the world. We're going to have old pulping technologies that we're going to have to still be using Band-Aids on in order to compete with companies that have put modern pulp bleaching processes in, that have increased their productivity and have reduced their environmental impacts. So from the world market standpoint, we all need to understand that products that are produced here will show up in other markets, and products that are produced in other markets are going to show up here. In order for us to produce and to be productive in these markets, we have to be low-cost producers. And the only way that these companies are doing this is because they're spending money on increasing their productivity at the same time that they're putting these new advances in for environmental awareness and eliminating the problems that are going on. One of the other things that hasn't been talked about here tonight is the fact that there are certain litigations that are going on in the world markets today. Litigation in the pulp and paper industry today is kind of interesting and really not interesting. I mean, it's kind of sad. As we continue to fight and use chlorine-containing compounds, one of the problems that we're seeing is that currently the U.S. pulp and paper industry has paid out around $21 million in litigation lawsuits. And there are roughly $13 billion in lawsuits that have not been resolved yet. And all of them are basically being surrounded by the issue of using chlorine and chlorine-containing compounds in the bleaching processes. So it's the one biggest obstacle that we in the pulp and paper industry have to contend with. And if there's an opportunity for us to produce a high-quality product without the use of any chlorine and chlorine-containing compounds, and we can do that effectively and economically and still enjoy an environmental benefit, then I think there's really no question as to the way that we need to go. To give you an idea of what's going on from the worldwide standpoint, we have a little list here of some of the different companies and the way that they're treating the totally chlorine-free process. Now, we've heard some things tonight about product quality, strength, brightness, and those kinds of requirements. I can tell you that one of the companies we work with is a company by the name of Sodracell, just one of many companies in Europe. They run both an ECF line and a TCF line side by side. They did that for about 3 or 4 years. This year, after doing some studies on product quality, on production, and on effluent guidelines, what they were able to do is they're saying, we're taking the chlorine dioxide out, We were replacing them with totally chlorine-free lines. And this year, Soja will produce 1.3 million tons of totally chlorine-free pulp. And those are pulps that are used in corrugated containers. Those are pulps that are used in printing and writing grades. And there are no loss in yields. There are no loss in brightness. There are no loss in tensile tear strength. Any of the characteristics that seem to be bandied about by individuals that have done lab tests but really have not done anything in the market or have done anything in their mills. So from a world market standpoint, what we see happening is a growth in TCF production. We see a growth in TCF uses, and we certainly see a growth in market awareness. And I think that's one of the things that all companies need to look at, is there is a great opportunity here to, one, eliminate an issue, but to capitalize on a market that is available to them because they are being the innovators and they're one of the first in the market to be able to produce and provide these products. And you as consumers need to make it aware to these companies that that's what your choices are. You need to vote with your dollars when you go to the store. You need to let these companies know that these are the kinds of things that you want because their customers are telling them what kinds of products and product quality they need, and companies are going to provide and make those kinds of process changes to meet those needs. And if you're going to be part of that process, you need to make your voices aware. Thank you.
I hope this setup is not coming from my assigned time. Yeah. Well, I think I start with asking the questions that why non-chlorine bleaching or why TCF bleaching. And I have been asking this question to myself and the other experts, and based on the information available, particularly the practical implementation that has taken place recently, it can be said that the main driver is the pollution abatement for TCF bleaching. The second one is capital and operating cost reductions. The third one is energy conservation. And fourth one, broader material utilization. And fifth one, technical consideration. And I shall just basically barely touch each of these issues. So let's go on the pollution abatement. Next slide. What we are talking about, well, here is BOD, COD, TS, color, these things we knew about that. But they were all along, we had talked about since 60s. But toxicity, mutagenetic behavior, carcinogenic behavior, chloroform, organochlorine, PCDD, and PCDF, these are the recent findings. So we have to be concerned with. Next one. Why all of a sudden? I mean, the question is that these compounds were there all the time. Okay. That these compounds were there all the time, but all of a sudden the community and the public is aware of, why all of a sudden the issue of dioxin and chloroorganics has surfaced. Well, because of these accidents. These are the list of accidents: Nitro in West Virginia, Love Canal, New York, Sueco in Italy, Birmingham, New York, Times Beach, Missouri, and South Vietnam, and BC fishery closure. So you know, what we are talking about, what magnitude they are. The world production approximately 50 million tons annually, total organically bound chlorine discharge at the rate of 4 to 5 kg per ton of pulp. So that means that the organochlorines, chlorinated organics are about 250,000 ton a year. This is what is. Next one. Well, so what? Well, now the thing is that the industry has to, because cluster rule is coming up, industry has to spend money. And when you spend money, then there is certain risk associated with that. So risk to investment, and particularly it causes uncertainty. What are the goals? Dioxin, how low is the low? I mean, we have been talking about, and maybe it's a little smaller than the smallest. That's my definition. You know, that it is never zero. And AOX, it started reduce it to 1.5 kg per ton, or eliminate it to 0.1 kg ton, what we are talking about. Chloroform, reduce it or eliminate it. And Wisconsin was putting 250 pounds per year. And I know some mills because my background has been in the mills. I was with the Scott Paper for 23 years before I moved to DuPont and formed my own company. There, just one mill that was Brunswick Paper alone, and I have internal memos, was producing 1 ton of chloroform per day. You don't have to go anywhere. You can calculate with pencil and find out that how much chloroform is generated from hypobleaching. And next one, please. So changing goals can make investment obsolete, particularly in chlorinated bleaching. You know, I remember my school days that I used to, you know, I was instructed by my teacher that you should round the figures to second decimal place. Now you are talking about the parts per million, billion, trillion, not enough quadrillion. It just goes on and on. So, I mean, today we hear a lot about that this non-deductible limits of dioxin. It's deductible today, non-deductible today, but what will happen tomorrow? The companies that make these equipments and deduct it, they have to sharpen their analytical techniques, and within 5 years they might come up. So if you are going to spend money, I would say that wisely you should study all the risk before you put money. Well, next one, please. So what can we do? The first thing is do nothing. If you don't have to spend any money, there is no risk involved with that. But as Archie pointed out, there are litigations, there are all these sensitivities and many legal implications, so you have to be aware of. And we can keep on arguing with the EPA or anyone, but you know, that might take some time. And that may not take us anywhere. Even the cluster rule, they have decided not to decide. At least that has been my conclusion when I got 21-page summary. And but market forces are the one that will really force the industry to move in some direction. And market forces and community concern. So my advice is that choose investment applicable for multiple goals, that useful for many possible goals on dioxin, AOX, chloroform, etc., and lower potential for becoming obsolete in a few years' time, minimizing the amount of investment, of course. So next one, please. So these are the various approaches. At least I have made a catalog that low chlorine, high chlorine dioxide substitution looks like that is gone. And now the first stage is 100% substitution. Investment, yes. I mean, I don't know about the stone mill, but most of the mills, those who are putting 100% substitution, they have to go additional, they have put generators that will supply additional capacity of chlorine dioxide. And obsolete by low AOX goals, yes. I mean, whatever EPA is putting 0.45, something like that, kg per ton, I am pretty sure that we conducted a lot of analysis. It cannot be achieved with 100% substitution. It's a touch and go situation. Sometimes you will get it, sometimes you will not, but most of the time it's missed than hit. The second one is sequential kappa factor chlorination. That's also investment, but it will become obsolete also. I mean, oxygen delignification, yes, capital-wise, it's a heavy capital investment involved, but it will never become obsolete because all the ECF mills and definition of ECF is misnomer. I mean, they say elementary chlorine-free bleaching process. What is elementary chlorine free? Only chlorine dioxide has element of chlorine. Chlorine is a molecule of chlorine. It doesn't have elementary chlorine. It's molecular chlorine. So I think the best thing will be to keep the same ECF, because ECF, TCF is well known, and everybody talks about ECF, TCF, so I say that eventually chlorine-free rather than just say elementary chlorine-free. And we are heading in that direction. Next one, please. And the capital and cost, second point was capital and operating cost reductions. Well, there again, here who you talk with. You know, some people will say it will cost a lot more money, some will say that it will save money, and it's just like when Pulp and Paper interviewed me, asked me a question that what is your answer? I said both are right, because 2 and 2 is 4 and 2 and 2 is 22, the way you look at it. So, I mean, if you are thinking of putting something in the greenfield mill, certainly. Non-chlorine bleaching or TCF bleaching will be less cost, it will have lower capital cost and lower operating cost. If you are putting in an old mill, well, certainly it will cost, because you are running something, the maid is paid off. If you borrow money, you have to pay interest on that, and it will cost money. So there the economics will differ, but it's still, it will, there is another factor that all the mills here are about at least 30, 35 year old, how long they can continue on without spending money. Even if there was no cluster rule and no EPA and no regulations at all, just to remain in business, one has to put some money in the mills. For example, I know that I was at a Scott Paper Company, their SD Warren boiler. Every year, every mill manager put within 5 years, but they kept on increasing until they lost the boiler. So that's what it is. The guarantee is maybe 20, 25 years, 30 years, but people run 40 years, 45 years. There must be an end of it. There will be sometimes breakdown. So these are the various elements of the TCF bleaching: counter current washing and recycling effluent. So even if you have the effluent plant, there will be much less hydraulic load, much power will be required, and you can save some money. Diffusion bleaching, elimination of stock pump and washing system and all. High density short sequence bleaching is non-chlorine bleaching for hardwoods here. Polysulfide pulping is coming up. In fact, there are many emerging technologies. I was in Brazil last month, and they are going TCF just to keep the strength in line, because they have a pulping process that gives a 7 kappa number and 50 viscosity. And they say that is such high strength that it takes a lot of refining energy to bring it down. So they are putting ozone to knock some of the strength qualities down so that they can sell the pulp. Okay, next. And the next one is the most important one. This is the energy conservation. And I have got several tables. Just can go over with this. Next one. Here is the case of a standard craft mill. Now the picture will change, because 100% chlorine dioxide will be replaced. Chlorine will be replaced by chlorine dioxide. So chlorate is the one. Sodium chlorate is the one that has that uses a lot of power. And so based on this, a typical, this I took from my book in bleaching that I put together some 15 years ago or 16 years ago, the bleaching of book, orange color. Those who are involved from type bleaching book, they must have come across that. So if you take a ton of chlorine and ton of caustic, this is the kWh, on left column, that's the energy required to manufacture 1 ton of chemical. And pulp and paper industry is using, that's the average of the industry. That's so total kWh comes 270. And if you put just oxygen alone, it still comes to 145, which is about the same. I say it's equal, because you have some additional equipment and pumps and starters and whatnots, and so that will be same. But when you could, 3 minutes? Okay, so next one, please. When you come the ozone bleaching, that is roughly half it there. So when you have totally TCF bleaching energy-wise, compared to the conventional bleaching, will use only half the energy. But now under new regulations, if you convert 100% substitute 100% dioxide for chlorine, then the energy requirement will go up. not necessarily your own energy, because you are not making chlorate, you are buying from somebody, but this is on the national basis. Per se, your energy might go up, because if you put ozone and all systems, that's nothing but energy. You have to have a substation, power station, so energy might go up. But if you take it on national basis, then it's down. It's less than half. Okay, next one. That's again, this is the case for softwood. The other one was hardwood. Here again, 275 versus 234. Okay. And I said about technical consideration, keep on going, please. I wanted to, keep on going, then maybe. This was something a long time ago I did, try to find out what happens in bleaching, that balance of chlorine and the chlorine-containing chemicals in conventional bleaching. And so these are the various methods of oscillating lignin. The next one, please. And if you have the ozone, and this is the structure of ozone, that it has got, in two structures, there is the octet is not complete, and this makes very powerful. Okay, next one, please. And it's a reaction with water, and you see on right-hand side there is hardly any ozone. It's all just in one equation has ozone, all have oxygen. So it will react with everything, and in bleaching has water, it has lignin, has carbohydrates. But if you look go through all the reactions, and you will find out that yes, it does react specifically. And this slide, I put it just for the yield. It has been talked about that there is yield loss in yield. And I arranged a meeting on last year, year before was the ECF versus TCF International Bleaching Conference. And in Missoula in 2 years. So some people got some lab report and they say there is less energy. But I said that go back and do the total organic TOC analysis. And an EPA Dan Bodine, who is in charge of the Western region, he called me. He said, "Well, Rudy, you were right. I mean, now they have done, the industry has done the homework, and they are saying that it's not, there is no, in fact, there is a gain in yield." And if you recall, when oxygen bleaching started back in '73, everybody was having, the main slogan was 5 to 10% increase in yield. So I think yield issue, strength issue, and the cost issue, you should go to the source, like Union Camp, everywhere claiming that they can reduce $5 to $10 per ton operating cost. So I don't know whether you will believe them or you will believe me if I say it costs more. Well, they are the one who are running the mill, and they have, and Sudra, for example, they are manufacturing 1.2 million tons a year TCF pulp. So if there is any complaint, they should have a complaint from the customer that your strength quality is lower. If there is any yield, they are the only one who can tell after running a couple of years that how much wood they used and how much pulp they produced. Okay. Well, then, it's too late now. Yeah, yeah. I had my oxygen highway that you can ask that if it is that good, then why everybody is not using TCF or something like that. My answer is, in industry, 20 years, 30 years is too little time. Unless unless it has any technology has been tried out for 20 years, industry will not accept. When oxygen started, there were a lot of objections that yes, there is a quality loss, there is a strength loss, and everything. Nobody talks about these days. If you have to build a new mill, one will put oxygen just without saying anything. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Singh. We're going to do a switch on the agenda, and we will have plenty of time for public comments, but you just may not be on TV. Darn. So we'd like to have the next steps portion of the agenda. Michael Kennedy, can you tell us a little bit about what you think we can do as a community? And then we're going to follow up with some of the panelists that maybe didn't have a chance to speak yet. Maybe give us your perceptions and closing thoughts for the evening. And then we will take time for public comments after that until we're done, probably until about 10. So, Michael?
Thank you. I'm going to keep my comments really short and leave as much time as we can for public comment. But I think keeping up this dialogue is probably the most important thing that we can do, educating ourselves and just showing that kind of leadership within the community. One thing, though, that I'd like to add, and that is the point that Garen brought up. Do we really care whether or not the pizza box that delivers pizza to us is white? Do we really care about that? And if we don't, why do we demand it? Why do we allow the industry to continue to think and live within the mythology that we do, that we place that demand on them? Let's send a different message to the industry that we're going to continue to support the industry, even if the brightness isn't at 100%. If it's down at 80% or something less, we're going to continue to support them. We're going to continue to buy those products. And I think we need to send that message out, and we need to send it out very loud and clear. We go out to Hennessy's and we buy a shirt, and they always put it in a box that's white. I mean, do we really care when we recycle it or throw it away? Does it really make any difference? And yet the industry contends that it does make it to us. And I think we need to send that message out, and it needs to be a very strong message, and it needs to begin here. So with that, I think all I want to do is to make sure that we understand that when the Exxon Valdez turned around and hit a rock in Prince William Sound, that when we drove to the protests, that we drove using gasoline from Exxon. And so it's our responsibility to understand that, and it's our responsibility to take our part in solving this problem. So thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Okay, the rest of the panelists who were not on the agenda, but you've been patiently sitting up here, we'd like to hear from you, too, on any closing thoughts that you might have or commitments and challenges that you see. You can say, I'll pass if you want. It's okay.
I guess I'd just add to what Mr. Kennedy indicated in regards to why these products are made. And it's because you and everyone else in the public wants them. The industry does not go out and promote white top linerboard. It costs more to make, and it costs the people who use it more. And the reason they use it is for whatever reason. They believe that you want it. And they continue to believe that you not only want it, you want it brighter, you want it cleaner, and the products that we produce that have a mottled white linerboard is no longer acceptable. They want a brighter sheet, they want it solid white instead of mottled white, and somebody out there wants it. The pizza box folks pay more for a white pizza box than they do for a craft colored normal pizza box. Now, they wouldn't spend that extra money if somebody didn't want it. It costs them more money, and most of the folks in the pizza business are trying to make money. So if they don't believe that helps market their product, they're not going to do it. And it's not the pulp and paper industry that drives the demand for the bleaching products in the industry. The demand for white top linerboard is growing at a rate substantially higher than demand for normal craft colored linerboard. Somebody out there wants it, and somebody wants it brighter, cleaner than it was yesterday. So I think, when you look at things like concern over bleaching, the concern comes from the public that demands the products. And not only in that area, but in the areas that we discussed in some of our previous meetings. The other things that we do in life all generate the risks that we suffer, if you want to look at it that way. And the public in the United States and in North America have demands. And everybody in business in this country and in the world is in business to satisfy somebody's demand. Otherwise, you're not in business. So I think that's some sage advice. If you look at where the demand comes from, you might find the best solution to your concerns in all of these areas.
Thank you. Further on down the line?
I guess I'd just like to say that I know Women's Voices for the Earth put a lot of work into this, and I'd like to tell them that we appreciate the opportunity to be here and maybe share some information like we did, and I'd like to thank them for all their hard work.
Thank you.
I think I'll just pass.
I guess I haven't heard too much about economics, so I don't have a lot to say, I guess. But the one observation I would make is that to the extent that we're talking about a local issue and searching for local solutions, it seems to me that I've heard a lot of confusion in our conversation about what are local and what are non-local, global or national aspects of the problem. For example, in analyzing the relative importance of sources of dioxin on the national level, it doesn't strike me that that's particularly relevant if we're trying to cope with dioxin on the local level. We need to know the contribution of various processes locally rather than nationally. I don't think that information is what we really need. I think we need something more. And similarly, I think in looking at market phenomena, both in terms of demand for products and on the raw material side, the kinds of solutions that involve dealing with plastics on cardboard boxes and so forth, I think we have to understand that Stone deals in a national market in response to national, presumably both in acquiring raw materials and in selling the product, is dealing in a national market. And frankly, my sense is that although it may have great symbolic value for the local community to amend its practices, it's going to have a minuscule effect on the conditions in the national market that's going to impinge on how Stone operates.
Thank you, Dick. And let's thank all the panelists for taking time tonight to give up their evenings for us. And we'll say goodnight to our viewing audience, and then we will begin the public comment portion of the meeting.
Sherry.